Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at NUGGET 2021 today, and for joining our session, RUM for All for RUM. This session will be led by James Michaelis, the Netrio Product Manager for Retrace. And in this session, James will be providing a reintroduction to Retrace Real User Monitoring and the open beta that we have going right now. So it's sure to be a great session, and please feel free to ask James any questions that you may have during the session in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So, James, all systems are go. Take it away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of NUGGET. I'm excited to be able to talk to you all about the launch of our RUM open beta. So just a little bit about me. My name is James Michaelis, and I'm on the product team at Netrio, focused on the Retrace platform team. So I've started at Stackify back in 2014 and have been involved in a number of different roles in the company. I started out in the customer success team, focusing on our customers and being able to interact with them directly. Then moved over to the QA team, where I was able to interact with developers directly. And now being in the product world, I'm able to interact with both customers and developers at the same time. So it's been a lot of fun being able to see the Retrace product evolve over the years, and very excited to see the next journey with Netrio being integrated with Retrace together. So today we're going to be talking about the introduction of the Retrace RUM open beta. And in the IT industry, we tend to really like acronyms. And I think RUM has to be one of the best ones out there. Whenever you get a chance to mix pirates and alcohol together, it's a fun time. I know marketing's been enjoying that part of the job, especially with RUM. So just wanted to go through the agenda really quick today. So we're going to start off by talking about the benefits of RUM, real user monitoring, and why, as developers or IT professionals, why you should be using that and how it can help. And then we'll go through some definitions of what RUM is exactly. And we'll go through a quick demo of viewing RUM in Retrace and what that looks like, along with a quick demo of how to get started in your Retrace account. And then at the end, we'll go through some FAQs, and we'll also have some time at the end to answer some questions that you might have through the chat system. So feel free to put your questions into the chat window that you have along the way. So before we get into what RUM actually is, I wanted to go over a quick concept of perception versus reality. So as we can see in these examples, what you see isn't always the reality of the situation. So in the world of monitoring, perception isn't always the reality, but to our users, their perception is their reality. So really the dangerous thing that developers can do is look at their monitoring data and assume that that is how it seems for their users. So really what RUM aims to do is tell real users how their experience is. So as we at Retrace attempt to paint the whole picture of an application experience, RUM becomes a big part of that. So RUM is really just the client-side performance for the user as it's rendered in the browser. And then APM is really what is below the surface at the service-side level, measuring the performance of your application code. And to dive into some more definitions around RUM, my definition of RUM is that it's the monitoring of real users and their interaction with the web application at the transaction level. And then real is the key distinct word that really defines what it is. And that's timings that are based on real pages being loaded from real browsers and in real locations. So when we look at Retrace RUM in particular, where we already have APM data being captured. What we're doing is we're merging this new RUM client-side data with their server-side component counterparts to give you more of a complete performance view on each request and response for your websites and applications. So just at a high level, to go through some of the features of RUM in Retrace, we have client breakdown graphs, user segmentation tables, aggregated requested URL charts, and client-side performance and trace views. And we'll go through in a demo right now of what that actually is. So I'm going to slide over a window of Retrace right here. So for those of you that are new to Retrace on this call, this is what's known as the app dashboard. And I like to think of the app dashboard as like a 30,000 foot view of everything that you're worried about as developers or operations. So here we have this overview dashboard tab of the app dashboard, and it will show you at a high level the health, performance, and errors of your application, and everything that at a high level you should be concerned about for your performance of the application. And then as we dive into some of these other tabs, you'll see monitoring, performance, errors, and logs, which will allow you to drill down into a more specific perspective. So as we jump to this performance APM tab and click on this client breakdown chart, this is where we'll get into some of the pieces of RUM that we discussed earlier. So the client breakdown chart is a good chart that will tell you just how the application is spending most of its time at a component level. So in RUM, we have different components, which are server time, network time, DOM loading time, and page rendering time. And we'll dive in to what those are actually capturing at a later time in this webinar. But for now, we can know that this is just a chart that will expose different spikes. As you can see here, around this time period, we had a spike in DOM loading time, and you can hover over the graph to zoom in and get a more detailed perspective. And then when you come over to this client request tab, that is where you'll see some of the user segmentation tables that I was talking about earlier. And really what this does is it puts your users into different segments. So for example, we can see all of the users that have used the site in the past window that we have here. We can reset this back to an hour. So now we can see all the regions that have viewed our site, along with the browsers and the devices that have viewed the application. And just to kind of set the stage of what we're looking at, this is a Retrace environment that is monitoring our production environment. So this is really Retrace on Retrace, a little bit of inception there. But the user segmentation tables are a really powerful way of how you can put your users into kind of some targeted groups. You're also able to sort by time or view of the certain segment. So for example, if you had an issue with a certain browser and you were to sort by time, you could see that an old version of Chrome is not being optimized for use in this example. So the user segmentation tables today are a very powerful way of how you can see different groups of users and how their experience is. And in the future, we'll be adding some more functionality around this to be able to filter and dive into your users even more. And then the next section we have here is this aggregated requested action chart. So what this is doing is it at a requested action level, or basically a user interaction level, we are calculating how many requests are being made for each endpoint hit, along with the different components that I mentioned earlier and how long they took, along with the total time. And like I said, this is aggregated data. So over the past hour, all these components are averaged out, at least for the timing components, and then aggregated across that time range. And then lastly, the last part of RUM that I wanted to highlight here is the performance modal and trace view. So here we can see on the left side of the modal, we have different things like the user satisfaction chart, which is really just a measurement of time across a specific threshold that you set, and then calculated into a satisfaction score from 1 to 100. We also have that same client breakdown, client load time graph here, showing the same data as before, but specific to this endpoint. And then we also have the performance breakdown, which basically rolls up all the different components and categories that make up the application time. So for example, we see database query, Redis calls, as well as .NET code that comprise of this, the application's endpoint that we're looking at. And then on the right side is where we have the trace view, which is really just a breakdown of all the timings that happened for your application. So here we see some different components that is happening at the code level for the application. And then once you browse all the way down here to this browser loading section, this is where we'll have some of the browser rendering timings that are specific to RUM. So you can see different scripts and resources being loaded by the browser that is represented by timings in this client breakdown. And I just wanted to go through and introduce a new view that we're working on internally at Stackify, at Netrio. The Retrace team is working on this right now, and this is a new trace view that will hopefully paint a clearer picture now that we have RUM data to pull in. So some of the things to highlight is we have a new rendering of components and resources. So instead of having the old view, this will be more of a cascading waterfall view that's measured up against a timeline chart. And then you'll notice we have different buckets. So the server time bucket for existing Retrace users, this will include all of the Retrace APM data that you're used to seeing. And then with the inclusion of RUM data, this will show up in its own bucket. And really the goal is to be able to quickly differentiate where the time is being spent, where the slowdowns are happening, and at a component level, see what different timings are comprising to the total time of your application or your request. So as you can see, we're adding up the client time and server time to give you a total time. So that's something new that we're working on and targeting towards the end of this year for production use. And just as a real world example of how this can help, using RUM in general can help. So the Retrace team, once we enabled RUM on our own services, like I said, we use Retrace on Retrace. So when we turned on RUM internally, we were able to quickly find that we were loading a font awesome script over and over across multiple requests, causing the client time to pretty much be disproportionate to how long we thought the requests were actually taking just by looking at server time. So if we go back to the iceberg example of not knowing exactly what our users are going through, this was a good example of that. And from that data, those extra pieces of insight that we were able to gather from RUM, the front end team was able to quickly spot and fix that font awesome script issue. And it led to some meaningful optimizations along the way. And we've had some other examples similar to that where we're able to spot and measure impact of something that was happening in the browser and fix that for performance improvements. And I think that's really where you'll see that RUM gets its value. So I wanted to also go through some getting started steps for those of you that want to try RUM out for yourself. So here we have an app dashboard like we were viewing earlier. One of the prereqs, you'll see this listed as step 1 in this getting started guide. One of the steps is to already have APM data flowing for your application. And for those of you on the call who are new to Retrace and might not have a Retrace account, I'll take a quick sidebar. Just head over if you want to stackify.com and start a free trial. It's really easy to get started, and then you can play with some of the things that we're talking about today. So like I said, you need to have an agent installed, the profiler enabled and reporting APM data like we are in this example here. And once that is sorted out, all you have to do is click on this Enable RUM button, which will take you to a different configuration page. Now, typically this will be turned off by default, and all you have to do is toggle that on, and then you'll see that a RUM key is generated. And then once you head back to the application dashboard, you'll see that there are specific steps that you need to take to make use of that RUM key that was generated. So there's different ways of injecting your browser timings or injecting the JavaScript that collects the RUM timings. And based on the different applications and languages that we support, we'll spell out what those steps are to utilize the RUM key. And once that is set up correctly, this page will automatically start collecting RUM data, and then you can be on your way, and you'll start collecting some similar metrics like I was showing you in the last demo earlier. So with that, I just wanted to go through some of the FAQs that we get around RUM. And the first one, and maybe the most important one that we get asked from developers a lot, are how do we calculate the client-side timings or the RUM data that we collect. So if you look at WC3's website, which is just an organization that puts together standards around performance, they have a performance navigation standard that highlights all these different events. And just to make note, so these are some of the events that we use at Stackify to hook into the different components that we collect. And this chart is a little noisy with a lot of different events, but if we clean it up a little bit, we can kind of get a clearer picture of what we're looking at. So the first event that we key on is the request start event, which is really just the first time a user clicks on a button or a link or does some sort of action in against your application. And then we measure that all the way through to the event load event, the load event end event, which is really just the time that everything is completely rendered and viewable by the user in the browser. So if we take all these events and apply it to the RUM data that we see, we can kind of see the different components all the way through that last event, which is measured at the end of page rendering time. So another question that we get is around support, and more importantly, what architectures, hosted architectures we support. So at a language level, we support all the same languages that we do for APM, which are .NET, Java, PHP, Node.js, Ruby, and Python web apps. And these are usually on architectures where the server side and client side code are loaded in the same request. So that means that we'll need to have an agent installed on the server and have the client side code and server side code in the same transaction. Now, what that means is we don't at this time support single page applications where you might have a front end application and then a separate API that the front end app calls. We do not support that architecture just yet, but it is something that we plan on supporting in the future. And then we also plan on supporting different popular UI frameworks and getting more detailed information out of frameworks like Vue.js and React, things like that. And speaking of the future and other roadmap items that we're hoping to include, so I mentioned the standalone support. We also plan on incorporating JavaScript errors as well as event-based tracking timings into the RUM data to just give you more of a deeper introspection into the RUM data that we collect, and hopefully lead to some even more powerful troubleshooting information. And just to close this webinar, I'd like to share with you one of the top goals that we have at Retrace, and that is to make the lives of developers easier by providing different data points, context about their applications. So we do this right now by providing server monitoring metrics, errors, and logs, along with APM data. And now with the inclusion of RUM, we hope that Retrace will continue to do its job of making developers and operations jobs easier as we go. And I wanted to open up the session now for any questions that you might have.